It's science.
Yo, we're back. It's science, you teenage dirtbags. Jordan, what's going on, Federation? How's
Hey.
it go? Something weird you guys might not know, but the only time I really talk to Jordan is when we're on this podcast. So, tell me about your life, Jordan, man. What's going on? You're just.
Oh, it's just like knee deep in dissertation and reading. So before I was doing all this work for not work, it's a passion of mine for all stuff for the podcast. I was doing some of my regular number crunching for my third chapter of the dissertation. So I got real lost in the weeds for some statistics literature, like ANOVAs and PermaNova, nothing that I think our listeners ever want to hear about, and rightfully so. So,
So, your life is basically in shambles
I
at this
mean,
point?
that's a pretty extreme word, but yeah, totally. Um,
All right. Gotcha.
now that we got
Um,
that out of the way, so
Yeah, we're done. Nice knowing what your life's been like. Great, but we have a podcast to record here.
yeah, let's
So
do it.
first, I wanna mention to some people where they could find us. They could find us at CBG Online Sports on Instagram. You could also find us at consistencybreedsgrowth.com or on Facebook as Consistency Breeds Growth. The podcast Instagram account is the_starving_podcast. We are coming out with episodes every 2 weeks. And today, we've had so many requests to do the Game Changers review. So, this is a movie on Netflix, or documentary on Netflix about the vegan diet and how it's helped a lot of performance based athletes, as well as helped people sort of on the health side, the human disease side. And I was skeptical at first to do a podcast with this only because people know our stance on this, right? With the intrinsic diet, we individualize every single person that comes to work with us, right? So if a vegan model or vegetarian model supports the dietary needs we think that they need for human disease, or if they have ethical reasons for being a vegetarian or vegan, then we absolutely individualize that, and we do have several people that we've helped using a vegetarian and vegan diet. But um, there are some negative effects of this, and there are things that people should know before trying something like this. And I think that that's putting your foot forward, and that's why at the end of the day I decided to do a podcast about this and split this into two parts because it's so much information. It's not just about the diet, but the agendas that different you know companies have out there. So let's go ahead and define, Jordan, what a vegan diet is, what a vegetarian diet is, and let's launch it off this way.
Yeah, so a vegetarian vegan diet. So vegan would be the more extreme version of the vegetarian diet. The vegetarian diet is just the abstaining from meat. So you get most of your caloric intake with vegetables, fruits, nuts, legumes, basically nothing that's, um, gives birth to another living, crying, and screaming thing at its simplest. And obviously, the vegetarian, there's a few different iterations of that. They have like a pescatarian, so it's a vegetarian that will eat fish. There's vegetarians that will still consume animal-based products. So honey is a nice one for arguing point with whether it's to include it in the vegan diet or not. But the large two that are cut off from the vegan diet are milk products, so cheese and kefir, yogurt, and then
Right.
you have the eggs, and that's a that's a pretty hotly contested one as well because they are such great. There's so many vitamins in both of those, and yeah, so that would be um, the two biggest, you know, parts of the vegetarian diet so
Yeah, the
far.
vegetarians can take in certain animal products, some milk and dairy and cheese and these types of things. Pescatarians, as Jordan mentioned, is sort of they incorporate seafood. into their diets, which is great because it's an easy way to sort of get in some protein. And then vegans obviously stay away from all of these sort of diets, food compositions that were mentioned for vegetarians. So, this sort of or these sort of diets are sexy to people, and people want to hear about them because it's a one size sort of fits all thing. So this is how this works. This is why people like this. It's why people want to hear about it because they want something that's going to provide them some shortcuts to reaching whatever their goals are, whether that's body composition or health or whatever it might be. And for some people, it is a good fit. But for others, they're just out there trying to gather information about what's the sexiest thing out there. And of course, that's not digging down into what their body needs and how they're individualized based on others and stuff like that. That's not sexy. Carnivore diet's sexy, right? Vegan diet is sexy. This is what people want to hear about, you know what I'm saying? So this is an important point of why these diets come out and, why they grab so much attention in the media and things like that. So, just as an example, right, like Kellogg's, right, they have so much more money than the USDA, right? They make billions and billions, and they spend billions in advertising, right? And they're obviously going to shift toward what's going to help their product succeed and what's going to sell. And this agenda-driven approach, right, is obviously starts with not including meat because they're directly competing with the USDA. So what do they market to? They market to, vegans, vegetarians, and this is sort of their approach. And this is how they potentially outsell in advertising the meat industry, for example. So, this podcast does have that in there. There are some really good points, but all in all, it's not my go-to for myself or for anyone that I've worked with over the last 8 to 10 years,
Yeah, there's some benefits for it. I mean, there's any host of reasons for choosing to become vegetarian or vegan or even going the complete opposite way and going towards the carnivore diet. I just listened to I'm going to make sure there's a pretty hefty reading list attached to this episode. So if you see me referring to something, I'll have it linked and you guys can go read. There was, on the Joe Rogan podcast, there was a political commentator, Jordan Peterson, and his politics aside, he and his daughter were engaging in the carnivore diet. I believe she had extremely severe, I think it was juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. Now, I'm not an immunologist, I don't know, but I have seen some things in the literature that suggest
some autoimmune,
yeah,
something autoimmune related, yeah.
And it was cleared up by this diet extreme. And I think that the difficulty that Justin and I have is that we can read the literature, we can have movies such as this with these sort of subjective, performance-based things. There's a part in the movie where they're talking about, I feel better, I'm stronger, I'm this and that. But having the numbers to put to them can be kind of difficult sometimes. And this carnivore diet I mentioned previously with Jordan Peterson, his daughter, they said, I cleared up my autoimmune condition and I'm living a better life. And I think they may champion that as this is the diet for me forever. But I think that it has been shown that if you don't eat a very diverse array of foods, vegetables included, that you will often suffer from micronutrient deficiencies. So I just think that no matter what diet you are doing, and this is something that the Game Changers, I felt like they didn't cover too much, was to really hammer home this idea of variety. No matter what you choose, if you're choosing to incorporate just plants, just meat, whatever, that you eat a variety of things. I got sort of bogged down in the gut microbiome literature, researching for this podcast, and I found it pretty interesting that they're showing direct correlations with um, a vegetarian diet, but like if you eat a very wide uh, scope of vegetables, so you have your um, I always think of Brussels sprouts because I eat those a ton. Those, cabbage, your leafy greens, that each of them have different plant compounds in them that will foster a uh, certain phyla of bacteria to grow in your gut. And the idea being that these bacteria will anaerobically, without oxygen, break down some of these plant fibers, and then that in turn will get absorbed through the lumen. So that those little the villi they have in your small intestine, those little finger creepy looking things. So I really feel they should have mentioned that in the changers because it's a hot and it's emerging field. It's really interesting reading the literature now when they say when you see the writers getting excited over something because they're just they didn't know that 20, 30 years ago that this microbiome is attached to your mental health, to your overall this larger picture of health and performance and nutrient absorption. So that's just something I wish they talked about, and something that is a really strong argument for, if not a completely vegetarian diet, but one that is predominantly plants. We have this. Justin and I have talked about it a few times. We call it like the plant predominant diet, where you'll be consuming a large portion of your protein through animal sources, eggs, chicken. I eat chicken all the time. That's my favorite one. Turkey, whatever. Keeping the animal proteins lower in fat, and then pretty much getting the remainder of your macronutrients through plants. Beans, like lentils for your carbs, and then just eating as many vegetables as you can. Like nobody got unhealthy eating cups and cups of spinach. I mean, there's other things to do with like kidney stones and how you say, I always mess this word up. The oxalic acid in it can concentrate.
Oxalic acid.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it's nobody ever said, "Oh, I've been eating salad all day and I feel like hell." That's just never going to happen. So
Right, right. Yeah, there's some people that digest fiber better than others, and some people on really high fiber diets can experience some discomfort. But for the most part, and before we get started, we have so much to go into.
yeah,
But like it's insane. But like, um, it's just the answer is, and if people take this from the documentary to eat more fruits and vegetables, then the documentaries did its job. Um, for every meat portion you have, you should have a veggie portion. To keep things simple. It's way more complicated than that, but to keep things simple, this is sort of, um, you know, what I take from the documentary and seeing straight through it. Right, you know, they're marketing a vegan diet, but if people can just start incorporating more fruits and vegetables, because that's the causal thing that they're doing. They're like, if you become a vegan, you're going to be a pro strongman, like the guy in the movie. Or if you're a vegan, you're going to cure this. But yeah, but what were you eating before? Like, what are the other impacts from eating just healthier, right? Not just eating plants, but eating healthier. You know what I mean? And this causal thing is very dangerous in science. Like if you do X, Y will result. But there are so many other variables, right? And this is why, the experiment that's like 40 years, we put people on a meat based diet. We took 5,000 people. We had them eat a meat based diet. We took their blood work every couple of weeks. And this study is never going to happen. It's never going to happen. It's way too much money. People aren't going to put the money into something like that to determine, what people were eating before, what they're eating now, right? All of these things, right? Like at the end of the movie, the firefighters, like what are those? Look, I have several uncles, friends, and people that are firefighters. I know how they eat, right? They just cook big pots of just calories, like doesn't matter, and then they all eat it, whatever, right? and then they go to a vegan diet. Of course, their cholesterol is going to get lower, right? This is this causal thing that happens all across the diet, and it even happens with the performance-based athletes. So, for example, um, there are two ways to essentially grow muscle. One is high protein intake, right? Dietary protein intake, and the other is actual muscle contraction and training. These people that are training in this documentary are training so much. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, their volume's
Um,
quite high.
yeah, the volume is insanely high. So like if you're not training that much and you're not eating protein, what do you think is going to happen to you? You know what I mean? Like you're gonna lose muscle definition. It's just the reality of it. You know what I mean? Um, and this is the angle that they take. And to be honest, no, like all the athletes in the documentary, they're great athletes, but none of them are the best. Kendra Ferris isn't the best weightlifter. Nate Diaz isn't the best MMA fighter, right? The pro strongman they mentioned in the movie is not the best pro strongman. He's not Brian Shaw or, Thor or any of these people that have,
It's
So
a tough
like,
sell having that.
yeah, yeah, it's,
I mean, it,
it's like,
yeah.
what
Go
is
ahead. I'm
that?
sorry. Yeah,
Yeah, no,
it's a tough sell because there's also, um, I was reading. There's this one website in Czech that was doing a takedown of the movie, and I try not to. I have mixed feelings about approaching it from this angle, saying, well, they're not the best. I mean, if you think about it, there's most of the athletes that have transitioned to the plant-based diet, at least that are presented in the movie. You know, I would have liked to have seen. I have these accolades before and after, or like the DEXA scans we've mentioned previously, something to show that there's a physiological response versus I just feel better. Like I feel better. Some days I feel better when I eat all plants, and some days when I go on a bender and drink 30 beers, I feel better. So like there's no change. There's something sort of nebulous there. What I think they should have done is sort of acknowledge the fact that this Czech website had said, that most of these athletes were not born vegan. They were later or vegetarian. They were later converts, and at least talk about that. Um, Again, it's just like it's like I feel it's almost like a cop. At least in my opinion, it's like a cop out argument where it's like, oh, they've only been vegan for 6 years. It's like, yeah, but they're clearly still able to perform. It may not be at a highest level, but I mean, you know, Kendrick Ferris in the documentary looked. I mean, that guy's jacked. There's no denying that. So I think that they should have, instead of having everything be subjective, put some numbers to it. Just because they do such a great job at the beginning, just like absolutely citing everything. And I got so happy when I saw that first 20 minutes of the movie where they're just the bottom left hand corner. There's a ton of citations. I was like, yes, finally. I
yeah,
loved it.
yeah.
So
Yeah, someone's coming. I mean, there's no denying that these athletes are great and that some athletes can thrive on a vegan diet. We're not contesting that at all. There are. Um, but you just have to remember that maybe that their record of I feel better may be because maybe their genetics are aligned with that of a vegan diet, or they just ate trash before, they ate whatever they wanted before, and now they've or maybe they're eating enough calories now. Like there's so many different things, you know.
yeah, there was those Miami Dolphins players, and they were talking about what their pregame ritual was, and I almost fell back in my chair. One of the I forget his name. He said, "Yeah, my pregame meal is Popeyes," and I was like, "Jesus, okay." Like if this guy's competing in the NFL and he could still eat Popeyes and go like destroy in a game, that guy's got some serious genetic ability to still be eating that crap, that high saturated fat, deep fried sort of thing, and then still go play a football game. One thing that I I sort of was confused about in the movie was, and maybe this is because I've read a little bit about this, but this idea that protein gives you energy. And they had one doctor at the very beginning of the film that kind of shut it down and said, no, if you're performing, high performance athlete, you're getting most of your your energy from carbs. And I said, okay, cool. This movie's 20 minutes long. This guy just said everything you need to know, vegan or not vegan, meat eater, whatever. That if you're getting your energy from carbs, we all agree on that. So what's this? What's all this continual insistence on protein for?
Right.
And I feel like they should have gone into the argument that well, they did mention proteins are made of amino acids. I have to give them points for that, but that those amino acids are not maybe not so much used for metabolic processes for energy, but for muscle repair and you know cellular mechanisms for transport and signaling. So protein's important to have, but it's not for you're not going to eat like a giant steak before you go run a marathon. You're going to eat potatoes or rice or something. So that was
Right.
one thing I wish they made it clarified a little bit more.
Yeah. Yeah, and this other thing. So we're just kind of going down the line here in order at a documentary, and we're just trying to display what some of the downsides are. I mean, they also mentioned these Roman
Other gladiators.
soldiers, the
Yeah.
gladiators. Like, okay, so okay, and people get hung up on this, and I'm really getting passionate about this here because like people get hung up on, oh, our ancestors ate paleo. Yeah, but what ancestors? Like, from where? Do you like? What is that?
Yeah.
Like, where's the data? Where's the data? Show me the data for that. Because, as far as I'm concerned, it's been thousands of years since we ate, quote unquote, what people believe is a paleo diet. And you shifting over to a paleo diet is going to be right for you. That's just crap. And it doesn't hold up. It just doesn't hold up, you know. And it's the same thing with these gladiators. Um, the gladiators ate this. They're big and strong. Causal. If you want to be a gladiator, eat a vegan diet. But like, you know, that from to me, like, we've evolved, we've adapted from that, right? Like, you've had generations and generations from people that weren't anywhere near Roman gladiators, their diet, the food that they had access to. You have ancestors not even close to that that are more directly linked, like your grandfather, your great grandfather, and these people, right? So to say to eat, but like a Roman gladiator, and that they were big and strong, like, come on, like,
There's
this
other
was,
yeah,
oh my
there's
God,
other
it was
things to
crap.
talk about with that. I think that we have this, like you mentioned this relationship. Well, if one person does it and they're big and strong, then we should keep mirroring that. I think it's a great way to set up the story for what they were eventually going to talk about. But I don't think just because gladiators may have eaten one thing or another gives us any credence to do so. But my other few things with this is that the the original study that was cited, there's a medical doctor. I'll link the video on the reading list for the episode. And he said, I read the original research article too, that, they're proxies, so how they're dating the bones and how they're doing one thing or another, and also how they're figuring out what the gladiators ate was based off of strontium, and that's the line of evidence they presented with this, and high strontium equals a larger consumption of plants, but also in the study I believe they did nitrogen as well, so another isotope of nitrogen, and that would be more linked to animals. And I think one of the conclusions they had in the study was that of the 60 something bodies they found, that no one, it wasn't just an overall vegetarian diet, but rather they said a heterogeneous mix. So like some people maybe ate more meat, some people maybe ate more vegetables. And the other thing of it too is that gladiators, if we're taking another historical perspective of this, that gladiators were slaves. They were fed whatever their owners were able to feed them. If they had a rich owner, well-to-do, they would obviously be fed meat, because meat then, as is now in most parts of the world, is something special. So it's not given away readily, or you have different cuts of meat, organ meats or something like that. Again, it's a very, very small point for setting the movie off, and I think it kind of does its job to get your juices flowing for arguing something. But I think it's a rather small point that we've just gotten hung up on for like 5 minutes. So
Yeah, no,
yeah,
I mean this whole thing, and it's the same thing with this paleo thing, like eat like your ancestors, and like it's just
I think yeah,
it's
I think
it's bad.
it's a line of evidence that just doesn't really work, especially now that we have genetic tools where we can genotype somebody and say, hey, okay, that same data that people are going off about, I'm 25% Irish or something. You can use that same data, through GenoPalette, and there's a few other services out there that can say, hey, you have this genotype for a higher fat consumption, so you may benefit from eating more fats versus a higher split in protein or carbohydrates or something. So this anecdotal, one size fits all isn't really a great approach. I think it can get you some places, but if you're going to perform at the way they attribute the athletes performing in the movie, you definitely need a more individualized approach and experiment. See what works for you.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And we have a partnership with GenoPalette, and they will tell you what your genes suggest. So like all this paleo stuff and all this other stuff, I need to be following this, and this. And look, just do your diligence on figuring out what works best for your body. And one way to do that, if you don't feel like doing the diligence of experiment, is hire a coach and get this GenoPalette data, because it'll tell you how well you metabolize carbs, how well you metabolize fat, whether you're predisposed to have low vitamin A, you need to take in foods with higher vitamin A. It's a 12-page comprehensive report. It'll tell you everything you were born with genotyping wise, and as it relates to your gut microbiome. It's not the whole story, but it's better than your ancestors ate paleo, you should eat paleo. You know what I mean? And this is sort of the dangers that people get into, and why they end up just, they don't, they see some benefit because they were eating bad before, and now they're eating better because they're following a food composition diet. Um, the other big issue with the vegan vegetarian based diet is protein intake, and Jordan sort of elucidated a little bit about this, but you know it is my belief, and a lot of muscle scientists out there are now shifting over to, instead of the skin being the largest organ of the body, that the muscle is the largest organ of the body. And it's because it has so many different functions. I mean, it makes up our life. Like our genes are made up of building blocks of proteins. It's our metabolic currency. It dictates glucose uptake, lipid oxidation. It's more than just locomotion, right? Like it's an endocrine organ. Like every time your muscles contract, you secrete myokines, which are anti-inflammatories. So like it go and there's so many different metabolic pathways. And explain to me how there are pathways to go from carbs to protein, gluconeogenesis, but there aren't pathways, not easy pathways, to go from carbohydrates, right, directly from carbohydrates, right? Carbohydrates have only carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Same thing with fat, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. How you get to amino acids that have nitrogen, that have sulfur, right? How do you do that, right? You can't directly do that, but from protein, you can go directly to carbohydrates. So this makes dietary protein extremely important for different metabolic pathways. You know what I mean? And if you're on a vegan diet, you have to make sure that you're getting enough protein, because especially if you're not this, you know, you can, like the movie said, you can get uh, leucine, isoleucine, valine from vegetables. But the amount that you would need of vegetables to do that is vast. 3 ounce chicken breast, in terms of the essential amino acids, equals about 4 cups of quinoa. Do you know how much more carbs or just calories that is to eat 4 cups of quinoa versus a 3 ounce chicken
About
breast?
240 carbs right there. It's a cup of quinoa is about 40 to 60 grams of carbs.
Right. So, like, look how many more calories that is just to get in the essential macronutrients in regards to the essential amino acids. And there are other things like iron, zinc, B12, creatine. Creatine is one of the best performance supplements we have available. It's found in red meat. It's found in meat. So, and vitamin D3. We won't get into vitamin D3 because most people need a supplement with that anyways.
Yeah.
But, like this is the reality, like protein is the building block. So like if you're on a vegan diet, like you have to make sure that you're supplementing with branched chain amino. I don't care what they said about you can get your essential amino acids from fruits and yeah, they're in there, but they're in low quantities. Like the protein amount in an apple is just so much lower than that. The amino acid profiles can't compare. They can't. It's it. That's it. They just can't compare.
Yeah,
So
you're also basing your absorption on um, ideal gut circumstances too. I read I'll pull up the reference too because I'd really like to have people read this. There was a paper I read that was, oh man, I can't find it right in front of me. I'll link it, but it said that there is a daily change in your gut's ability to absorb any one of the macronutrients, and that this was largely to play with whatever is going on with your gut microbiome. So if you're eating like crap all the time, your gut microbiome is shrunk to the point where it's almost killing you. It's instead of absorbing the nutrients that you need, they're pissed off and they're dumping out inflammatory compounds into your gut. So you're actually prohibiting absorption of everything. So that means if you're counting everything really, really well, but you're just eating the wrong things, that you actually have to keep eating a higher amount of those things. So when we say, a cup of this equals a cup of that, there's these different processes that go on in your body that can actually make that a little bit more difficult than it should be. So
right.
yeah,
And this is sort of the biggest reason that we hold off on putting people on a vegan and vegetarian. You touched on it here, the gut microbiome, right? The gut microbiome has certain bacteria in it, and this bacteria, it's the bacteria is our interaction with the outside world in the most plethora of ways, right? Our interaction with the outside world versus the inside is our ingestion of food. This is the most, right, interaction. And if you don't have good gut bacteria in your stomach, then you're not protected, And if you're not protected, and you don't have a resilient gut microbiome, this is how people get sick, infections, you name it, And um, and the biggest thing with the vegan diet is that before you know anything about yourself, you've just watched this documentary and you've decided to do a vegan or vegetarian based diet. You've already restricted your food composition and the foods that you can have by more than half, probably. Animal products and dairy and all these other things that we intake, it takes up so much space in just the food that we have available that you've already restricted your food composition in half just because you watched a documentary. You know what I mean? And you could be a great metabolizer of so many different animal products, but you've cut yourself, you've limited yourself on having a resilient gut microbiome, on being able to take in and ingest lots of food and benefit from some of the, from a disease prevention perspective and a performance-based perspective, just because you wanted to, you liked the movie and you thought that since they cited some things and you like the Roman gladiators that you're going to try this. You know what I mean? So this is some of the dangers, and I know that Jordan's sort of highlighting some of the good things about it, and I'm highlighting more of the bad things, but this is sort of understanding, like if you're looking through our lens of CBG and our perspective, that it's an individualized approach, and we don't go to the vegan or vegetarian based diet first. We don't go to it first. Because of the reasons that I'm sort of mentioning,
Got to get it all in. So, Justin and I decide we're going to keep this one short so we don't talk you guys to death. So I'm going to throw two more little factoids out before we close this one down. So 2 papers I read, I'll throw them into the references. So one of the big complaints with the meat-heavy diet that we found in the Game Changers was that meat causes, wholesale inflammation. So I found this one study that utilized the Mediterranean diet that said a lot of these inflammatory compounds that are held in meat can be undone with vegetable pairings or red wine and spices. So that's one. I'll give you guys something to think about. And then the next one, which is a meta-analysis. Now, Jess and I don't really have the time in this particular podcast to go over meta-analyses, but they're used quite a bit in epidemiological studies, and we hold them with very, very large grains of salt because it's a study based on just basically lit searches of the remainder of the studies. But this one particular study, it's Dinu et al. 2017, and I'm going to throw this in the reading list, said that it may be difficult to attribute the vegetarian or veganism, the good parts of the diet, with regard to LDL and total cholesterol, because foods that are high in those, animal products mainly, are consumed less under the vegetarian and veganism diet, and that a lot of the things that make up the predominance of a vegetarian and vegan diet, say legumes, nuts, soybeans, are all increased. So you have this concomitant reduction in those high cholesterol foods, and then an increase in the foods that sort of uptake those as well. So we'll leave you with that. I'm going to leave it for Justin to close this one out, and then hopefully we'll have another episode coming up soon to finish off our takedown, our challenging of the vegetarian and veganism diet.
Absolutely, dude. I think we provided some good info there for you guys that are thinking about this approach. And if it's something that you're thinking about doing, reach out to us. There are lots of people that can thrive on a diet like this. You just need to make sure you're doing it right and you're supplementing with the right stuff. If you're not going to eat meat, you're not going to eat animal products, right? And it depends on what your goals are, whether they're human disease related or performance related or weight loss related. All these things matter, which is why these general umbrella approaches they don't really work all that well for most people for extended period of time. So with that, we're going to go over a lot more in the next podcast. We'll go over the erection scene, human disease, some more epidemiology studies related to saturated fat, cholesterol, more causal relationships and things like that. And we'll go over a little the environment side of this, because I think people are sort of skewed about the environment and how much animals versus plants and veggies and things like that are sort of involved in this. So stay tuned. Next week we'll have the next podcast on the Game Changers movie, but you can find us at consistencybreedsgrowth.com. You can email consistencybreedsgrowth@gmail.com. You can find us on the_starving_podcast on Instagram, or CBG Online Sports on Instagram, or Consistency Breeds Growth on Facebook. Dude, awesome. Thank you guys so much for listening.
Thank you.
And we'll be back. Bye.
Bye.
Science.